is David Chatham with Angel Oak Creative. Thank you all for joining us for our webinar today about retaining COVID donors. I'm curious to get some of your experiences with this and as far as what it looked like during COVID for you. So we certainly will open it up for some discussion today, but just want to make this as, informative and engaging as possible. And, just appreciate all the time that you guys have to spend with us today and look forward to just hoping to add some value to this next hour or so. Just so you know, Jeff and I will be around a little bit afterwards. If anybody wants to stick around, more than glad to answer questions or spend a little extra time if it's needed. If not, no worries at all. So thank you all again for today. I'll just, we'll jump in real quick and talk about retaining your COVID donors. Just for introduction's sake, today we have Jeff Hensley from Armstrong McGuire. Jeff's a senior fundraising consultant. I'm a senior marketing consultant. I jokingly say that the emphasis is on senior. So we hope that some of our years of experience will be helpful today. Jeff, would you like to spend a little time introducing yourself? Maybe talk a little bit about your background and experience?
Sure. Thank you, David. And thank you all for joining us today. I've been doing fundraising consulting for 20 to 25 years, come out of working primarily with faith-based nonprofits and schools, and but work with across the gamut of nonprofit organizations, helping them get better at raising money, retaining donors. We work with capital campaigns, looking at their feasibility as well as their execution, and I'm starting to do with Armstrong McGuire some executive search work as well. So really enjoying my work. Native North Carolinian. I live in Cary, North Carolina, which makes me very odd to be native North Carolina and live in Cary, but grew up on the western side of the state in Asheville, where my mother still lives, and have lived in the Triangle for the last 10 years.
Great. Well, thank you. We are also honored to have Bert Armstrong on the call today, who is the founder and I guess CEO or president of Armstrong McGuire. And we also have Caitlin Kleinert, who is the founder and president of Angel Oak Creative. So I guess, Jeff, you and I have to prove ourselves a little bit more today. We're under scrutiny here. So, but welcome everyone to that. So grateful for you guys being here. Just real quick, a little bit about Angel Oak Creative. I think Jeff talked a little bit about Armstrong McGuire. For those who aren't familiar with Angel Oak Creative, we're a marketing firm here based in Raleigh, North Carolina. We serve only nonprofits. Next year will be our 10th anniversary, and we are just really honored to be able to work in this sector and to just be of service to nonprofits. We are a full service firm. We do everything from branding to marketing to social media marketing to website development, campaign support. We are not fundraisers. We do often partner with folks like Armstrong McGuire on campaigns and other initiatives as a partner, and love working with fundraising professionals to really help impact nonprofits. So we're grateful for that relationship and that opportunity. Jeff, anything else you wanted to share about Armstrong McGuire that you didn't cover?
We're just here to make nonprofits better in whatever you do, but primarily in your fundraising and in your operations. We do strategic planning and succession planning as well. Work with boards and board development, and then also help you find your next key staff person in executive search.
Great. Well, thank you. And we have some amazing fundraising professionals in this area and have really been blessed to be able to work with many of them. So we're very grateful for that. Today, we're going to really talk about this idea of the COVID donor retention and what that looks like. So we're first going to start about kind of what we're calling the COVID donor conundrum. What were some of the interesting issues and challenges that were there? What does that mean for me, for you, in terms of your organization? And then, so what, what's next, and what can we do to really ensure that we maintain relationships and engagement with those donors, and to really foster that over time to ensure that we create long-lasting relationships. What we consider kind of the COVID donor conundrum is this interesting aspect, and I'm going to let Jeff talk a lot more about this, but what many of our nonprofits saw, Angel Oak on any given year works with about 30 to 40 different nonprofits. Really, we saw the majority of our nonprofits really gain engagement and relationships over the course of COVID. Donors really stepped up and responded and met needs in ways that they haven't in the past. We've seen some of our clients increase 100% in terms of their fundraising, 200% in terms of their fundraising, increase their donor numbers by hundreds. So the good news, and we'll talk about that a little bit, is that there were a lot more donors, there were a lot more money coming in, but the challenge is, how do we maintain those relationships with donors who may not have come to us because of the cause or because of some relationship or interest, but more so with an urgent need to fulfill. So let's get into the good news a little bit. Jeff, did you want to put any more context into that before we get into, kind of some of the more finer points?
No, let's just jump into the data. I think it really tells the story.
Go ahead, Jeff. I'll let you take from here.
Sure. So these data points were pulled from a recent report by the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, and it's a project that's been in existence since 2005. So it has a nice longevity of data that it can pull from. And it's sponsored by the Association for Fundraising Professionals, which is the premier professional organization that fundraisers belong to. And these are data points comparing around 2,000 nonprofits that they monitor on an annual basis, and data from comparing 2019 to 2020. So these figures might look a little bit different from other studies like Giving USA, which just released its results earlier this month. It's simply because they have a very different pool of nonprofits that they're pulling from. But for at least these roughly 2,000 nonprofits that the Fundraising Effectiveness Project is monitoring, here are some of the results. The number of donors increased substantially by over 10% from 2019 to 2020. And that's great, because that's reversing a trend that we saw in past years, where we're decreasing the number of donors that are giving to organizations. So we saw a real uptick in that this year. Secondly, donation amounts increased by 7.3%, which is huge, given the fact that many of us were very worried what effect the COVID pandemic would have on giving in general. People were losing their jobs, people were facing economic uncertainty, and many thought this might have an adverse effect on philanthropy. In fact, it was just the opposite. I think people responded to the needs. I think it helped that the market recovered so quickly, because we all know that the market trends really mirror giving trends. So we saw a substantial increase in giving from 2019 to 2020. And one of the wonderful other aspects that we saw are new donors. These are individuals that never gave to an organization in the past and gave for the first time to that organization. We saw that number increase by 18.5%. So the pandemic seemed to have an impact of engaging more people in philanthropy, perhaps for the first time for some of these organizations.
Yeah, I'd be curious from our audience. I don't know, raising hands may not be the best option, but how many of you saw a similar trend in your organization? Did you experience this rise, or maybe a thumbs up or thumbs down if you saw this rise or change, similar trend in your organization for the last year? Got a thumbs up from Susan? Got a few. All right, we got a handful of thumbs up. Good deal. So yeah, so I mean, I think, that again, to me, it was just really interesting to watch going into COVID and really not knowing, just having so many uncertainties, right, Jeff, of how is this going to impact? And then once what I saw, and we'll talk more about this, but what I saw was once our organizations made the decision to lean into it, that people responded. And I think that's the difference, was those who kind of stepped back and wanted to be a little more cautious or a little more conservative were, kind of paid a little bit of a price there, I think. Jeff,
Exactly.
any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think those organizations that decided to engage their supporters early on in this pandemic have seen the benefits of that work. They stayed connected. We were recommending a lot of these organizations just reach out and say, hey, are you doing okay? How can we support you during this difficult time? And that goodwill really did pay off, I think, in terms of increased support from these individuals back to the organizations. They realized that you were treating them much more than simply a cash machine. You were treating them as a human being, as a person, as a partner who has feelings and emotions and is affected by things like a pandemic. And that goodwill, I think, really has endeared many of these individuals to your organization. What we've got to figure out is, how do we keep them? How do we keep them engaged and moving into 2021, 2022 and following? Some of the
Jeff,
other interesting points, the good news out of the FEEP study is that 13.7 more lapsed givers were reactivated in 2020. So people who sat out in 2019 of giving to an organization were reactivated. And that's also a great sign that maybe this pandemic started to cause some people to think, I really do need to re-engage some of the organizations that I have supported in the past but have dropped off. And we saw increased giving at all levels of giving. So those givers that give typically $250 or less to an organization, there was the biggest increase there, 15.3%. This might be, we don't know yet, we don't have enough data to demonstrate this or not, but this might be because of that $300 above the line charitable deduction that was introduced in the CARES Act. That might be an effect of that, because as you know, we've been seeing a lot of low-level donors dropping off because fewer and fewer people are itemizing on their taxes. The ability now to take a $300 above the line deduction, and in this year, 2021, if you're married filing jointly, you can take $600, both you and your spouse can take that deduction. It really has helped, I think, jumpstart low-level giving. But we saw increases in mid-level giving, and of course, continuing the trend of increases at major level giving. So this was a trend across the giving bands, which is a really good sign for philanthropy.
That's great. And just so you guys know, if you have any questions in the midst of our presentation, if you just want to type it into chat, either privately to me or to everyone, feel free to do so, and we'll try to answer some questions as we go along as well. Or if you have just comments or anything like that, if there is something you'd like to say, just shoot me a quick chat, and I will open up your mic. Or if it's super urgent, just shout it out. Well, thank you, Jeff, for putting some of that into context. It's just interesting to see. I'm still really amazed at some of these numbers, to see what how responsive people were during the pandemic. So, but now a little bit of bad news. As we get into this, what are some of the challenges that came out of this, Jeff, that we really want to be aware of? Maybe not, some of it may have been a continuing trend, or maybe some of it is, something we really have to keep an eye out for. But what are some of the challenges that, are on the heels of this good news?
So the biggest challenge, and it's been the biggest challenge for nonprofits for years, but I think we see it in a heightened way this past year, is donor retention. How do we retain the givers that we have? We all work with boards that say, oh, we just need to go out and get new donors. How can we expand our donor base? And yet they don't seem to always understand too that if not more important, is keeping the donors that we have. If we were able to improve retention in our own database by 10 to 15%, we would be making and exceeding our fundraising goals for growth year over year. So in general, nonprofits, I think, don't pay enough attention to donor retention. They tend to focus more on donor acquisition, and it's to their peril if they don't do that. Also, donor acquisition costs are exceedingly high compared to donor retention costs. So if you can get the same results in terms of growing revenue by retaining the donors that you have at a cheaper price point than trying to go out and get new donors who may or may not retain with you year over year, it's a much better investment of your resources and your time.
Jeff,
Here are some of the, go ahead, Dave.
Do you have any sort of statistic on that by chance? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but is there a comparison between what it costs to retain versus what it costs to acquire?
Well, in some organizations that I've worked with recently, we did our own internal study, and it cost us 5 times
Wow.
what it would cost us to retain a donor than to acquire a new donor.
Wow.
You're often losing money the first year to 2 years on a new acquired donor just because of the upfront costs that are associated with that. Think of the events, think of the marketing that you do, think of the direct mail appeals that you're sending out, or the lists that you're buying to acquire new names to market to. Those all have significant price tags associated with them. Whereas in donor retention, some of the activities, and we'll talk about those in a minute, are relatively cost effective. They're engaging, they're sending emails, they're meeting with your donors, they're doing donor information events on Zoom that can be low cost and yet highly effective in terms of donor engagement. The general donor retention rate fell by 4%. From 19 to 20. And it's really, I believe, at an all-time low in the FEEP study since 2005 at 43.6%.
Jeff, can you define what donor retention is? Just what does that look like? Is that
Sure.
someone who gives year over year? Just I'd be curious to get a little clearer definition of donor retention.
So this number measures, let's say the person gave in 2019, but did not give in 2020. So in what this data point says is the average nonprofit was able to retain 43.6% of the people that gave in 2019 in 2020.
Wow.
So it's measuring it year to year. Repeat donor retention rate is higher because those are people who gave in 2017, 2018, 2019. 59.6% of those people gave again in 2020. So that was only down by 3.9%. It's still a significant drop, but it's not as bad as the overall retention rate. And what does that tell us? It tells us that people who are used to giving to your organization over time tend to stay with your organization over time. It might be that those individuals are on a recurring giving program, so they're giving monthly. They've just given you their credit card information. They're not really thinking about making the act of giving. They just know it's there all the time. Those donors are highly retainable because of that activity. The final data point, though, really tells a difficult story for us, and one that's acute when it comes to this current situation that we're in with the pandemic. New donor retention rate, 19.3%. So what FEEP is suggesting is that only 1 in 5 donors that gave to you for the first time in 2019 were retained in 2020. So it shows you that donor retention is a general problem. 43.6% of donors are retained, but it's an acute problem on those people who've given to you initially for the first time in any given year. Keeping them as a repeat donor in your second year of relationship with them is very, very difficult. And it dropped significantly this past year by 9.2%.
All right. I know we have a couple of questions. I know, Susan, you've got a question. Is that?
I do. I was wondering if there was any research done based on this research as to why the donors dropped off. I know our organization has seen so many lapsed credit cards just because of all the credit card scams and, everybody switching platforms and stuff like that. I mean, it has been a real effort for us to stay on top of people's monthly donations. So I didn't know if there was any documentation that showed the percentage of those.
I think for this past year, it's too early. We're still gathering that data. And as a matter of fact, just 2 days ago, FEEP released its data for Q1 of 2021. So they released their data quarterly. So we're starting to see some trends now into 2021, which will be interesting to track. But I think you are right. The one major concern, particularly with these repeat donor retention rates, a recurring giver who's giving you his or her credit card is going to be retained until that credit card lapses in terms of its expiration date, et cetera. Or maybe they had some identity theft on the card and they had to cancel the card and they just forgot that they even had given you that card to give the donation. So it really behooves nonprofits to stay on top of that. But to your point, Susan, it takes a lot of bandwidth to do that. You really have to have a person designated in your organization that's tracking that sometimes on a weekly basis. With one of the organizations that we work with, I've recommended that they have a staff person that monitors that on a weekly basis. And she will call that individual whose card has either been declined for any reason at all. Sometimes she doesn't know the reason, she can't see the reason from her end, but she calls them and says, Mr. Smith, we've been so grateful for your support of our organization as a recurring donor, but we've noticed that your credit card has been declined. Would you like to continue your donation? And if so, can we have some updated information on this card? And overwhelmingly, the response is yes. Oh, the card was stolen and I had to cancel it. And so let me give you this new information. I didn't realize that I had used that card to support your organization. It's also a great opportunity to engage that donor and to thank them again, and maybe ask them, what can we be doing more for you as a recurring donor in terms of getting you information? Are you hearing from us enough? Would you like to learn more about our organization? It's a touch point, and I would encourage you to really use that. It's going to be time well spent if you have someone doing that on a very regular basis.
Yeah. As a communicator, that's certainly something we would recommend as value, is to find those touch points and to find ways to engage in that way as personally as possible. I mean, I've been on the end of that, the receiving end of those things, and getting a pretty impersonal email saying, "Hey, your credit card's lapsed," is not the warmest touch point. Now, I get it. There's certainly sometimes capacity doesn't allow it, but I think we've got there are opportunities there. So that's a great suggestion, Jeff. We have one more question real quick, Jeff, from Heath at CLI Prison Alliance. To what extent do you think these positive trends in giving are related to the stimulus efforts?
So I think you can make some correlation there. Again, it's too early to tell, given hard data isn't quite available yet. I mentioned the CARES Act above the line deduction. I think that really has helped. I've just been amazed over the years in being in fundraising, and I suspect you all have experienced this too, of just how extraordinarily generous people can be. And they respond to moments of crises, and we have gone through 12 to 18 months of crises collectively as a nation, as a world, and I think people are really responding to that. If the stimulus funding helped promote that, I think that's a wonderful net effect of the stimulus, and I'm hopeful that though that will continue even after the stimulus dissipates.
Yeah. And one more question from John. And John, I may ask you to elaborate on this a little bit. You're asking for new donors, what is the common platform that triggers their payment? Is that the app, the website, or mailing? Can you elaborate on that question just a minute, make sure we understand what you're asking?
Yeah, so I'm a part of a new foundation, getting ready to serve get promoted, if you will, from treasurer to chair. And the question is really from our marketing kind of perspective, where should we align that? So from your data showing that, new donors gave, and new donors would obviously be our audience, what's the best method to reach them? Is that an app on the phone or website, mailing, kind of any knowledge on that?
Yeah, and
David,
we're
you
going to be
wanna
talking
address
about
that?
this a little bit. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was going to say, David, I think you'd be well positioned to address that.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about this in a little bit. A lot of it comes down to really knowing those donors and their preferences. So, really asking them, and also being sure that you've put in place a really solid way to measure and to track their behavior, in a sense of whether it's metrics that you're following on your website, or whether it's the app for your donors. Where are they coming from? What behavior are they undertaking when they get there? Are they dropping off at any point in the process? Are they calling you with problems in that process that are common, or kind of trending? So I think that ultimately it's going to come down to really understanding their preferences and their behaviors. I think that obviously the most common approach is, the website donation form, I think, is probably you're going to find to be your one of the largest filters, or the feeders for your giving, and making that as clear and as simple and quick as possible is a really good suggestion to follow in terms of that. Don't try to collect all of your information in that first engagement. Make it a low barrier to entry, so that they can get involved quickly. And then as you get to know them better, find out more information and ask those questions that are going to help you to make that information more valuable to you. So is that helpful, John?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. I think, Jeff, this is somewhat repetitive from our last slide. Is there anything
Yeah.
that you wanted to highlight?
I think the only real issue to highlight here is that 43.6% of donors retained is the lowest rate since 2005. And what that means is we've known that this is a problem for some time, and we still are having a difficulty addressing it. And I think it's really become, I don't think it's an overstatement to say, the most critical issue facing fundraising for nonprofits is how do we care for our donors better in a way that will retain them. If we could solve that issue, we could really move the needle significantly in terms of the amount of money that we raise year over year.
Yeah, it's interesting, around that 2005 number forward, there certainly was a lot of move to social media at that, if you kind of track that. And I wonder if the lack of personal contact and moving more towards electronic and digital and relying on that more, I wonder if that has had some of that impact, that we've relied almost too heavily on some of those digital touch points and lost our focus or our ability or capacity maybe to take on more personal relationships. So I don't know if that's the case, but it's kind of interesting, the timing of that and the rise of social media, after just a few years, moving forward from that. So
Yeah, absolutely.
so anyway, so what does it mean? I think these are the why we're here today. What does all of this mean to me? Jeff, I'll let you take it from here. I mean, one of the things we talked about is donor motivation and crisis, donor motivation during COVID, crisis versus cause, that idea of their responding to an urgent need versus having them really have a personal connection with your mission. So you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe how that was different in the last year or so?
Correct. I mean, if we've seen a real uptick in the number of donors, the number of new donors to our organization, it might be because they were responding to the crisis that we were all experiencing. So the challenge will be, how do you move them from a momentary response to a crisis to a real transformative, deep engagement to your organization through commitment to your cause, to your mission? And I think what we need to be thinking about in terms of, if we're really focused on donor retention, is how do we bring those donors over to that embracing of the cause? That how do they, go from responding to a crisis and just maybe an impulse gift to your organization? Boy, I need to give to the soup kitchen because I know people are going to need these services this year, to then moving to saying, I want to support the soup kitchen because I know it does amazing things. It's having an incredible impact. And because this is a cause that I really believe in long term. So how do we reposition our messaging? How do we reposition our engagement with donors, particularly first-time donors, to move them to that, to really falling in love with the cause and not simply that impulse gift initially? And part of it is, I would strongly recommend, as you look at your donor base from 2020, who are your newest donors? Who gave to your organization for the first time in 2020? And really isolate those and maybe do some very targeted communications. David, what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit here on the next slide. But yeah, I certainly believe that really understanding, as we were talking with John about, really understanding your donor and as much information as you can gain about them, and really just finding out their intention, their preferences, their the way that they like to be communicated with. I think all of those things are important in helping them move maybe from those crisis decisions, that act of urgency, to a sense of relationship and long-term.
Oh, yeah.
All right. I sense it.
And just really building those long-term relationships. So we're going to talk about that here in a little bit as well.
Right.
We talked about donor retention being at an all-time low. I think we covered that. Talk about donor fatigue, Jeff, if you would.
And I think, these are both retention issues and fatigue issues are issues you need to raise with your leadership, and particularly your board or anyone in your organization that's saying, let's go out and get more donors. We need more donors. Well, let's talk about the donors that we have. Let's talk about first the way we're caring for them. If you sense some fatigue in your donors, maybe the communication cadence should be different. Maybe not every communication should be a solicitation, but more of an information communication or simply a thanks. You can never overthank the donors that you have. I've never heard anyone complain, wow, this organization just thanks me all the time. Never heard that. Never heard that. I have heard, boy, this organization always asks me for money all the time, or the only time I hear from them is that they're asking me for money. So, be sensitive to where your donors are in terms of their own cadence of relationship with you. I think that's really crucially important. They value information and communication. That's so key. that every touch that you have with them isn't an appeal. It's an exchange of value. They're exchanging their resources to support you, and in so doing, you're sending back to them information and communication about the impact that you're having in the world. And it's because of them. You're making them the hero of that story. And we mentioned before, donor retention really could be viewed as a greater good and greater activity for you to be focused on than new donor acquisition. I'm not saying you shouldn't ignore acquisition. We obviously have to, over time, grow our support, and we want to try to find creative ways to do that. But retention really can pay off and be a much cheaper alternative to trying to always go out and find new donors. It becomes the hamster wheel that we're on and churning through donor after donor after donor.
And Jeff, I think we found that your current donors are your best source of donor acquisition, right?
Exactly.
That those donors that what we're finding is that if we can start to better equip your current donor with the tools and information they need to share it with other people, that they are going to be really the best ambassadors and really be your arms and legs on the street to help tell your story. We tend to forget that we kind of expect them to start from scratch with a lot of the information, that we're producing, where as opposed to really giving them as much as many tools, as much equipping as we can to help tell our story. So whether that's in the form of videos or pre-made social media posts or content that they can just, quickly share with other folks, and really being clear that that's hopefully one of our expectations of them as a supporter, is that our ask doesn't always have to be for money, but how valuable is it when one of your long-term donors invites one of their friends to continue to, or to start investing in your organization. So really thinking about that one to many or one to a few approach, and then you're also investing in them in the sense that you're entrusting them with a deeper relationship with you. So that donor retention and just having those long-term donors makes your job easier in terms of donor acquisition, because they're doing some of that work for you. They're either softening the ground in terms of getting people aware, or they're actually making some of those asks that you just aren't able to make all of those asks about. So I don't know, Jeff, if you have any thoughts on that.
No, it's a great point, and it's related really to your final bullet there, abundance versus scarcity. How many organizations try to raise money out of fear and out of deep scarcity? Oh, we have to shut our doors next month if you don't give. And you wonder, what's the motivation there that you're trying to convey to your donor? Why is it that extraordinarily successful organizations tend to be the best fundraising organizations year over year? It's because people want to have confidence in the organizations they give to, and they want to think about, is my gift going to leverage and multiply the effect that this organization is already having in this world? I'd rather give to that kind of organization that I know is doing wonderful things than give to an organization that I'm simply deferring the ultimate reality of that they'll probably close their doors in another year to 2 years. So having a message that really talks about the impact that you're doing, the abundance upon which you've been given in terms of the resources from your current donors, and the motivation then for them to share that information with others, to your point, David, of donor acquisition. I think all of that breeds a confidence in your organization that actually elicits greater generosity than any fear of going out of business would, in terms of gaining, either retaining donors or gaining new donors.
Yeah, I think so. And just a reminder, if anybody has any questions as we go along here, feel free to drop it into the chat area and we can respond. Oh, Susan's got another question.
It's not really a question. I was just thinking that, you can only use the, oh my gosh, we're going out of business tactic once,
Right.
and when it becomes your ongoing mode of operation, that you're sparking fear in your donors each time you send out a request, then you're using it way too much. I mean, I certainly would not want to tell an organization that is really struggling financially to put on a smiley face and say
Right.
everything's great. But, if your mode of operation is help us every year, then you probably need to think of a new way of addressing people.
Well, it
Exactly.
reminds me of the business in New York that has branded themselves going out of business. So that's the name of their store. So they decided they did it so often they would just own it, and so now their store is going out of business every day. So probably not the best look for a nonprofit.
No.
So you got this. We have a lot of faith in our nonprofits. We have a lot of faith. This year, our theme for the year at Angel Oak is Nonprofit Tough. We really believe in the strength of nonprofits in this community and the philanthropy of our donors. And we really want to just encourage you to know that you can do this no matter what. These are things that are, you live and breathe this every day. Sometimes it's good to have these conversations just to maybe get some different viewpoints, but you guys are professionals and we value the work that you do. A few things that, we would just kind of recommend, in terms of maybe next steps coming out of this particular presentation. These are just some of the suggestions that we might make. Just kind of recapping some of the things we talked about. Jeff, you want to hit this first one again?
Sure. I think we can't overemphasize this, is really to identify particularly those first-time givers that you've had in 2020 and really do targeted communications to them so that you can make sure that they are falling in love with the mission of your organization. It wasn't just a momentary impulse gift, or maybe they had a friend tell them about it and they just sent something out of some kind of loyalty to their friend. Try to engage them and win them over to your cause. And really, I think it's related to that second bullet, is to focus on the impact that you're doing. If they can understand, wow, I didn't know much about this organization. I gave this one-time gift, but they've been really communicating to me well. They've been engaging me and they've been showing me the kind of impact that they are doing. This is an organization I want to find out more about. This is an organization I might be willing to become a second-time giver to. That's really the goal of retention, particularly of those first-time givers.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen this with a number of our clients. I know, I think Donna Pygott is on here from North Raleigh Ministries, and we did have some crises with them, and we did reach out and ask for help through the media and some other things, and had a great response, a record-setting response for that organization. And she and her team have done a great job of really trying to foster those relationships from those first-time donors to help convert them into that. And the way that they've done that is to really focus on the impact of those donations and what it's meant, not just during that crisis, but for the long term. And what the ability that those donations, that the opportunity it's given them to really, to really continue to serve and even increase their capacity to serve, not just now, but into the future. Donna, I don't know if you're on here still, but if you are, anything you want to kind of comment on that? I hate to put you on the spot.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. We've really been focusing on the relationships and getting to know the donors. And it's just unbelievable how many people came together to help us through a challenging time during the pandemic. And we never had to close our doors because of all of the support that we received in so many ways. And now we just want to be able to thank our donors, let them know what we've done with their resources, and just continue to do well by everyone. So, and when we did that, a lot of this work we did do through help from Angel Oak Creative. So I do want to say that as well. I didn't do this by myself. I had a good handful of people really helping me through that time.
Well, thank you, Donna. I wasn't looking for an endorsement. It's always appreciated. So thank you.
Yeah, can't help it though, because it's true.
I appreciate it. Thank you for that input. We have a couple of questions. Natalie is asking, do you recommend focus groups of donors, perhaps categorized by new donor, long-time donor, or is it better to learn about their needs with one-on-one calls? My experience, I think, is yes, and I think it just depends on the type of donors to whom you're speaking. Certainly, I would say with major donors, and again, I'm probably stepping on Jeff's toes here, so I better be careful. But I think with major donors, certainly some of those one-on-one relationships are worth an extra trip to meet with them or spend time with them. I think as you get into the broader categories of donors, either creating some focus groups or, there's also the idea of kind of a town hall where it's not quite as formal as a focus group. You're giving people a chance to come together. Maybe you do it around a specific milestone or a specific impact point in your organization, and give them a chance to, listen to some of the things that you're doing, but also give them a chance to provide feedback as to what that relationship with you is like. So certainly I think there's a kind of a spectrum of ways that you can engage them. One way is to certainly do surveys, and we're going to have that as an option. But, if you haven't, I don't know how many of you have done a donor survey in the last year. If you haven't, now is the great time to do it. You've got, if you've experienced this donor, this increase in your donors, getting to know them, asking them questions through a survey is one way to do that. And it creates a two-way communication versus just that one-way monologue that you're having with them in a lot of cases. So consider those different options, and depending on your audience, I think having the ability to do everything from kind of the larger donor survey to maybe some of these town halls, maybe some focus groups, and maybe some one-on-ones, some combination of those over the course of time, I think can certainly add value to the way that you're understanding your donors. Jeff, anything?
No, I absolutely agree. And another suggestion I would have, we're talking about engaging donors, not just informing them. When was the last time you as an organization re-examined your welcome flow of new donors? We all probably have a system where we receive the donation and we try to turn around a thank you acknowledgement within 48 hours of receiving the gift. That's best practice. But what do we do beyond that? Do we just drop them into our normal communications flow? Or do we actually do some intentional things to welcome them as a new donor? Do we have a welcome packet that we send them? Do we have a board member call them and thank them for their gift? What amazing impact it would have to a first-time donor to give a donation to an organization, and 2 weeks later, a week maybe after they receive their thank you note from your organization, to have a board member call them up and say, I just wanted to thank you for the gift you've made. This organization so near to my heart. I serve on its board, and this is kind of why I'm passionate about it. I'm so just grateful for your support, and I'd love to welcome you into this family of supporters of this organization. It's really can be an effective way to engage donors beyond simply informing them.
Yeah, I think so. And then one more question just about COVID and acknowledging that still today. Do we, how much do we, kind of include COVID in our conversations and in our communications? That's a good question, Susan. I think we struggle with that as well. I mean, we certainly want to acknowledge it. We don't want to dwell on it. I think everybody's kind of ready to get past it, but it's still affecting people, whether it's directly or indirectly. I think, again, it comes down to either, knowing the audience is certainly one thing, but also then really what is the context of the communications that you're sending? Is it something that could potentially, put someone at risk? Are you inviting them to an event, or are you doing something like that? Or is it maybe just a more direct communication about the impact you're making or something that's going on? And maybe then it might not be quite as relevant to mention it. So I think it's a great question, and one that I think we'll probably be talking about for a few more months. But I do think it comes down to context and the audience as to when you kind of acknowledge or want to discuss COVID. So I don't know, Jeff, any thoughts there?
No, I agree. I agree. Context is everything in that case.
Yeah. So what's next? We've talked about this a little bit already, so I don't want to be too redundant, but get to know your donors, surveys, visits, virtual forums. People, yes, we're all Zoomed out. I get that. I appreciate you being here today and taking one more Zoom call and doing this. But it's still a valid way to engage your audiences. So certainly think about maybe doing some of those. You could do those. We've done virtual focus groups during this time for our clients and things like that. So, really spend some time getting to know those donors and let them know that's what you're trying to do. I think people appreciate, I know as a donor, I appreciate them asking what my preferences are, how do I like to be communicated to, what information is valuable to me. And while you can't maybe on an individual basis respond to every one of those requests, it certainly gives you some idea of what the majority of your audience is, and maybe even a way to segment those audiences to help you develop those kinds of communication. So anything about getting to know your donors, Jeff, that you would want to talk about?
No, other than I think really segmenting your donor base into your consistent monthly givers, folks that have been with you for some time, and then your brand new donors, and making and paying some attention to those segments and how you're communicating to them. You can't assume that the new donor knows everything that your donor that supported you for the last 10 years knows about your organization. So you might want to customize that communication to that different segment. And that takes time and bandwidth, but this is a good time to be doing that work.
Yeah, definitely. Communicate clearly and consistently. My marketing philosophy is to call it what it is. That's just the way that I look at it. So, it's great to come up with, really fun, compelling messages. We do that every day here, but just don't do it at the, at the sake of losing clarity. So don't confuse your donors, I guess, is kind of the bottom line. Really try to create clearly what is the impact, what is the need, what is the opportunity, and then do that consistently. The one thing that I see, the biggest, I think, shortcoming or the biggest mistake that a lot of organizations make is what I call hit and run communications. They'll get the donation, they may do a thank you, and then that donor doesn't hear back from you again, to Jeff's point, until you're asking for more money. And for some of them, that's their preference, and knowing that helps. But for most people, they want to know what's going on. How are you using their money? How are you using their time, their investment of time? So just try to do that on a consistent basis with a rhythm that meets your capacity. That doesn't mean you have to communicate every week or every day, but at least every month or maybe every quarter, giving folks updates. What does that look like? Just in a way that they can know what to expect and how you're going to provide that kind of information and value to them. Create those opportunities for deeper relationships. Jeff, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, and it gets back to, do we do it one-on-one? Do we do it via the phone? Do we do it in a Zoom group meeting? I think yes, and yes to all of that, and varying up those ways of creating deeper relationships are really important. Again, you have to be cognizant of your capacities and what really is realistic for you as an organization, given your staffing and size and resources. But any way you can engage your donors in varying ways over a set timeline is going to be really helpful. It's going to raise the intentionality of your communications, and it's going to reap in deeper relationships moving forward. They're going to understand that you're wanting to build a relationship with them as a giver, not simply a transactional process with them.
Yeah.
And if you can get it to that level, then, you know, the question is, do I want to maintain this relationship? Not whether do I want to maintain this transaction. And then if you get them at that relationship level, the commitment is much greater and longer over time.
Thank you. Really practical step. To Jeff's point, now's a great time to clean up your database as you've gotten these new donors in. Really take some time. This is the albatross for everybody. I think the database. Some people really own it and do it great. Other folks struggle with it. If you need help with that, we've got some resources that we can respond. I'm sure Jeff and them know some great folks who can help with database cleanup. But now's really a great time to do that, to really go into this next season with clean data and really clear understanding of those donors. That's another way to understand those donors. And then, just real simply, know your donor retention rate. I don't know if everybody knows that or not, but that's something that just knowing that and then tracking that year over year or quarter over quarter or whatever rhythm makes sense to you is going to be helpful in helping you determine, is what you're doing working, right? So this is a metric to help you see and move different levers within your communications and within your donor relationships to see, okay, if this isn't working, let's try plan B, right? Let's work on seeing if this is going to help us to either stabilize or increase our retention rate to at least above kind of the sector average, if not, to our own hope and specification. So Jeff, any thoughts there?
Yeah, two thoughts. I would, if you have the capacity, know your donor retention rate per giving band. So remember the 3 bands that we talked about, 250 under, mid-level, 251 to 999, and then major 1,000 up. It might be different for your organization depending on the donor base that you have. You might have more bands. The bands might be bigger in terms of size, et cetera. But if you can start tracking retention by giving band, you see where you're losing people. To lose a donor under 250 is very different in terms of its impact on your organization than to lose a donor who's giving over $1,000 a year.
Yeah.
And if you see that the attrition is happening at that highest level, then there's a real problem that you need to address immediately. So that would be I think my main recommendation around retention is really tracking it by giving bands. And then secondly, set a goal for yourself, for your organization this year. Say, okay, we've measured our retention for the last 3 years. We've been losing 2 to 3% a year. Let's set as our goal this year to just retain what we retained last year, to stop the tide moving in the wrong direction. And then for the following year, let's set a goal of increasing that by 2 to 3%, and keep showing some metric, progress. And that's a great way to come back to your board and say, we're not only trying to raise more money this year, but we're also trying to retain the donors that we have in a better way. And we're starting to track that now. And I think your board will start to appreciate that. You'll educate your board more on why donor retention is more important than new donor acquisition.
Great suggestions, Jeff. Thank you. And then finally, just any questions that you guys have. We're right at 12:30, so thank you for your time. Just if you want to reach out to either one of us, you're welcome to email us, David at Angel Oak Creative, or Jeff at Armstrong McGuire. Certainly welcome to reach us there. And then we wouldn't be doing marketing if we didn't ask you to follow us on our social media. Check us out. We do, I think both of us have newsletters and that sort of thing. So love to have you connect, engage with us if you haven't already. Just thank you, Jeff, for your time today. Thank you for the information. Thank you, Bert and Armstrong McGuire, for partnering with us today. Very grateful for that and appreciate all you do for our community. Thank all of you who participated today. We're very grateful for that. Jeff and I are more than welcome to stick around. If anybody wants to have a little conversation, we're more than glad to do that. If you've got to get back to work, we certainly understand that as well. But thank you all for your time, and just let us know if you have questions. We'll be hanging out here for a little while longer.
I would love to ask a question if you have time.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll put the video on. Laura Klauke, work with refugees, the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. And I was so moved and we don't have a huge individual giving program. So we're developing it. We're getting it going. And I was really moved by the generosity of, we acquired a lot of new donors during COVID, people who were willing to provide emergency funding. So we had a special emergency fund that covered rent and basic living expenses for individuals who didn't qualify for any sort of government assistance. And it was hugely successful. At the same time, we also provided unemployment. We helped refugees who were eligible for unemployment to file for unemployment. So one of the impacts that I realized is, I don't want to say a couple of hours because we have an amazing staff and people were getting up at 3 a.m. in order to try and get this unemployment claim through because the website kept dropping, and it was a disaster. So our staff really worked incredibly hard. But when I look at it, it was 2 or 3 months of all hands on deck, but it resulted in over $1 million in funding going directly into clients' pockets.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm trying to figure out how to message that to donors, because we had this huge number of people who gave knowing that their donation went directly to immigrants and refugees who needed assistance for basic services. And that, people responded really well to that. But somehow basic services just isn't quite as sexy, but it has this huge impact. So I'm just struggling with, thank you so much for your previous donation. We were able to help, hundreds of people and prevent homelessness. We have fabulous stories, but now I need to shift them over to, now what we really need is staff to help someone find a job. Just
Right.
Any thoughts on that? It's just, I can't make it, I don't know, sexy is probably a bad word, but it's not sexy. I don't know what to do with it.
That's going to be our theme next year, is nonprofit sexy. So, so thank you, Laura, for that. Yeah, that's a challenge. Jeff, any initial thoughts on that?
I think, again, it's part of moving this donor from responding to the crisis to loving your cause. And I think one of the ways you can do that is to say, we're so appreciative of the gifts you gave this past year because it helped us address this crisis. And you did it in amazing ways. And you share stories about that. You share vignettes about the lives that have been impacted by this. What our challenge is now is, how do we make those stories sustainable over time? How do we make these people who we've really introduced a new possibility in life have then a flourishing life beyond this moment? And so your gifts now help us build the capacity that we need in order to help them flourish as members of our society now. So I think you build on the story of how you responded to the crisis, and you talk about how do we make these amazing transformative stories sustainable over time, such that in 10 years we come back to the same person and we see that they're flourishing in their community.
Love it.
One of the things that we really try to do, and I know that we're an animal rights organization, which is completely different from refugees, but it's telling those individual stories. When you lump everything into we helped 100 people, that's a lot of people, but it's not as sexy as saying, meet Joe. Joe, had this problem and you saved him from homelessness. Now Joe needs a job. Will you invest in Joe by giving a donation to help him with job training or, whatever the next thing is? So I think really sharing those stories, and I think that's one of the successes that we've really seen over the past couple of years is investing in stories, because they really do make a difference. And I think individual stories too much, we try to, I know that we want to paint the big picture about the thousands of people that we helped. And I think it's good to say, because of donors like you, we've been able to help 1,000 people. But then you have to drill it down and see, meet one of them. This is Joe, or whomever your favorite person is, whatever story you're telling.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think all of that's great advice. I don't know that I have a lot to add, but yeah, I think really just helping. It's kind of casting a vision, right? It's about saying, here's where we were, here's where you allowed us to go, and here's where we're going, right? And here's how you can help get us there. Here's how your investment is going to get us to that next phase, right? That next season, that next opportunity. So giving them a chance to see themselves in that journey and helping them to find their place in it, I think is also helpful in terms of giving them some ownership of that, helping you realize that vision of no more homeless refugees or whatever that is, right? Helping them to see themselves in that, I think is great. So
But again, David, I don't think it's necessarily about helping your organization, hire a staff person.
right.
It's not about helping your organization hire a staff person, because, we all need staff people. It's more about helping Joe with a service that he needs, because that is the end result. And that's where, I think I know I used to have a really difficult time trying to talk not about my organization's needs, but talk about the needs of what our mission is, and putting it back on the individual person who needs the assistance. Even though it's the organization who needs to hire a job training specialist, it's the refugee who needs to have a job. So that is more sexy than the staff member. Does that make sense?
Right. Leah, thank you for sticking around. I don't know if you have any questions or anything. I don't want to ignore you there. Maybe Leah fell asleep. Well, thank you both for sticking around
I was hoping that there would be no more questions about COVID. This is the thing that's got me right now, is just how to transition, because I don't know, it just seems a little insensitive to kind of like drop everything and stop talking about COVID, because it has, so many of our communications, we're still making changes every day. Like we just released our mask mandate. So now you can come out to the sanctuary and you don't have to wear your mask anymore. So,
yeah. And I think in that context, that's perfectly great, right? I think in that way, I think it is just really finding that balance, because, I think where it makes sense and where the context dictates, I think you acknowledge it, you put it into the proper framework. But I don't know that I don't think people are to the point now where they expect you to talk about it in every communication, unless it's relevant, right? So I think it is finding that balance and just, using that information and providing value with it, like with all information. Is there what's the reason for it? What is the outcome that you're hoping to elicit? And, does it make sense to use that limited, you've only got a limited time that you have their attention, right? So what is the best use of that time? And some of it may be for COVID messaging, but what percentage of that is going to be the most valuable to that audience, right? So I appreciate that that's something that's important to you, but I don't know if it's as important to them. And I don't know that answer. I think that's a question you could maybe find out if you could maybe ask some of your board members what they think about it, or maybe ask some of your donors, how important is this, to do. Laura, thank you so much for being here. Look forward to continuing the conversation. So, but yeah, I don't know. So Jeff, any thoughts there on that? Or
No,
I see Caitlin are still here. If they want to chime in, they're welcome to.
My sense is that, like you said, Susan, you can convey that information. You don't have to wear a mask now when you come, assuming that you're fully vaccinated. I suppose is that the stipulation? Sharing that information at least brings to mind the pandemic in I think, an appropriate way. So, the way I'm finding a lot of nonprofits are talking about the pandemic today is in positive, looking forward beyond it and through it. So it's not focused on, what impact it's had on us, but more, how do we emerge from it better than we were before, than we went in, and some nonprofits have been saying, look, we've learned a lot about the way we need to do business now. And we're being better at that. We're being more efficient. We're going to communicate with you better as a donor now, moving forward. We know that we don't always have to, shower you with email messages or other ways of communication. Maybe we've learned a little bit better on how to respect you better as our partner in this work. And so looking at lessons learned and positivity about how we come out of this, I think, is what I'm seeing as a good trend in the industry right now.
That was the $1 million answer. Thank you. That was
Okay.
excellent.
$0 forward yet. So.
Send me your bill. Good luck finding
Oh, well, okay. Be careful what you ask for.
it.